Okay, well, good afternoon. I'm going to start this off by asking how many people here have heard of the Beatles? Just heard of the Beatles? Beautiful. That just proves my point. The Beatles are just fantastic, and maybe if you haven't even heard of the Beatles, you've probably heard some of their songs, but didn't know it was the Beatles. So let's get this going. Okay, so even if you haven't heard of the Beatles, you've definitely heard their music. A lot of people have heard the Beatles. And people still listen to them today. They're very creative. In my opinion, they're one of the best bands ever. And I'm going to prove to you today why they're one of the best bands ever and what it means to us today. Now, the history of the Beatles. The band was formed in Liverpool in 1960, and it consisted of Paul McCartney, George Harrison, Ringo Starr, and John Lennon. Before that, there were failed attempts at a band started by John Lennon, such as the Quarrymen, Johnny and the Moondogs, Long John and the Beatles, and the Silver Beatles, and with their albums. In 1962, they started with Please Please Me, and that was like an instant hit. It totally got their name out. A lot of other bands at that time were trying to get their name out, and this did. In 1963, there was With the Beatles, and that was around at the time of the Ed Sullivan Show. So that was when they totally got out there, and people were like, who are these guys, you know? In 1964, A Hard Day's Night. Along with that album, it was their first movie debut, and that was really big. I heard that they were stoned out of their minds when they were making that, but still, it was a good step in the right direction. Beatles for Sale, 1964. It wasn't amazing, but I kind of got them on their track. In 1965, there was Help, and along with that album, it was their second movie, and that was a good step. And also in the same year was Rubber Soul, and a lot of people said that was just a huge leap in musical maturity. They felt like the Beatles were getting better and better and better. And then in 1966 was Revolver, and that was kind of their trippy stage. That was when they were getting into drugs, used a lot of guitar, but it was still good and different. And then in 1967 was Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and that was acclaimed as an instant masterpiece. It got #1 on Rolling Stone's 500 Greatest Albums of All Time. And that same year was Magical Mystery Tour, and that was they tried different musical styles, dressed up as animals and went around in a bus, so it was definitely different. 1968 was the White Album, and that was when they were definitely going their separate ways. They were just totally different and unique. 1969 was Abbey Road, and that's personally my favorite album. It's really well done, has a lot of good tracks. And then in 1970 was the last album of the Beatles. It was their final stage. It was called Let It Be. And that was when they were totally breaking up. You couldn't really even call it a group effort. They were just totally going their separate ways. And the Beatles as people. Paul McCartney, he was debatably the favorite. A lot of people liked Paul McCartney a lot. He wrote most of the songs with John Lennon, and he played bass as well as singing. Then Ringo Starr, he got his name from wearing a lot of rings on his fingers, obviously, so hence the name. And he was the drummer. George Harrison, he was the guitarist. He was kind of off to the side. And then John Lennon, he was big into peace, and he was a crazy character, very independent. And his relationship with Yoko Ono was kind of breaking up the band. So if you're somebody say, you're being such a Yoko, that's probably where it came from. But each of the Beatles, they definitely each had a successful career after the band. So they each went their separate ways and did really well after the band too. And the genius of the Beatles, I just think the Beatles are so creative. Just look at Abbey Road, Sgt. Pepper's Magical Mystery Tour. There's not really an album like that. Nothing that can really compare to that creativity. And the sound of their music, it was upbeat, it's fresh, it's original. It's just very unique. And their legacy, they totally added to rock and roll, and in my opinion, just added to music. Just all their music just helped it come along. And people still listen to them today. I know I do. And people still know who they are. So they are a very, very good band. And in a conclusion, I would like to say, I would just urge you to listen to Beatles music and prepare to be changed for the better. Thank you.